Coming up, it's a show you don't want to miss. On day 3 of the Reservation Economic Summit, we're talking to a senior advisor from the White House, a cabinet secretary, and a recipient of the Native American 40 Under 40 Award. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is honored to be a supporter of Indian Country Today. Working with award-winning professors, Cronkite students learn news reporting, social media, shooting and editing videos, and producing content for communications industries. Cronkite's 15 professional programs give students the opportunity to cover critical issues throughout the U.S. and beyond. Learn more at cronkite.asu.edu.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Amadawa Hopa, thank you for joining us. The ICT Newscast is on location in Las Vegas for the 2022 Reservation Economic Summit. This is the homeland of the Nuuvi, also known as the Southern Paiute people. Let's start with some headlines. We begin in Montana, where Interior Secretary Deb Haaland is highlighting infrastructure investments for Native communities. She made a visit to the state last week. Haaland met with Indigenous leaders to talk about the department's commitments to Indian country. She spoke about the Indian Water Rights Settlement Completion Fund. The $2.5 billion fund will help deliver long-awaited water resources to tribal nations. This includes to the Blackfeet and Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. The infrastructure bill also provided millions for Rocky Boy's North Central Montana rural water system and the Fort Peck Reservation. The funding will help to provide potable water and update aging water systems. In Australia, a police training program is aiming to recruit teenagers from the Indigenous community. In the town of Victoria, the number of officers who identify as Native Australian is just 0.5%. Recruiting police officers isn't always easy because of the strained relationship between Aboriginal communities and police. The program has been criticized by community legal services, who say it's not appropriate to target First Nations teenagers for recruitment. They would like to see positive changes within the organization before sending young people there. Sergeant James Egan has spent nearly 40 years on the force, but remains one of only a few Indigenous police officers.
Truly represent the community, then we need to have diversity, and we certainly need more Aboriginal members, without doubt.
Egan says what the program hopefully represents is a desire to break down barriers. One participant says she is being taught new things every day, and the training is keeping her busy.
It's actually been really interesting, and you're learning something each time you're there, and no 2 days are the same.
Students will finish their training over the next 2 years. On the Res trade show floor, a new business called the War Chief Collection was created to combat alcohol and drug addiction. ICT's Mark Trahant has the story of how this idea became a reality.
One of the extraordinary things about the Res conference in Las Vegas is the sheer volume of people doing really interesting things. There are all kinds of businesses on display with things they're doing to make the world better. One really interesting business technique is to take what could be a negative and turn it into positive. And one of those ideas is to take wine and beer and turn it into non-alcoholic products.
Jody Colbert is on a mission. She wants to give people a real choice about whether to drink alcohol or not. She said this idea started when her great-grandfather visited her in a dream.
In my dream, he told me that's where I'm going to build. And so that's what I did. And the visions just kept coming, and it just won't stop.
She says these alcohol substitutes could really help save lives.
Because we don't have non-alcoholic beverages in Indian country. And that's the problem because of the combat that we're having with alcoholism on the reservations. It's a touchy subject for me.
Many people today talk about healthy choices. Usually that means a lighter meal or food, but it could also mean a beer with dinner, minus the fermentation. In Las Vegas, I'm Mark Trahant, ICT News.
The alcohol from the craft beers is removed with advanced technology, and the non-alcohol beer products are made with hops grown on tribal lands. The Indian boarding school system nearly wiped out the Seneca language, and now there's a new effort underway to revitalize it. According to the Endangered Languages Project, there are fewer than 50 native Seneca speakers in the world. Classes range from kindergarten level to adult learners. One of the more advanced classes involves transcribing recordings of native speakers, as well as learning ceremonial speeches. And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. Coming up, we're speaking with federal officials about initiatives for Native communities. Plus, we're talking Indigenous food and agriculture. We'll be right back. Advocating for tribal nations in the White House. That's the job of Pauwi Rivera. He's a senior advisor in the White House Office of Intergovernmental Affairs. Hi, Pauwi. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Aaliyah.
So we're here at Res 2022 in Las Vegas, but before we get started, I want to talk about the very tragic massacre that happened in Texas. I mean, so many people are reacting to it. What do you have to say to Indian country about what happened?
I think it's something that weighs heavy on all of our hearts. The president spoke on it yesterday, calling for the need to take action. From all of our colleagues, I know it affected many of us personally. Obviously it was a local issue to Valde, but it's a national tragedy, and certainly, grieve for those families, and as the president said, we need to take action.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll see this play out in the coming days and weeks, of course. It's definitely been something I've noticed here among attendees, something that has been really heavy on our hearts this morning. So I wanted to ask you about that. As you're going around and talking to tribal leaders here, what kinds of messages, what kinds of conversations are you having with them?
I think it's important for tribal leaders to know that they have a place to go in the White House, that they have a seat at the table, that their voices are being heard and listened to. Since the beginning of the administration, we've really made an effort to ensure that tribal voices are a main part of all the things that we do, whether it's infrastructure development, whether it's through the American Rescue Plan, whether, we're talking about environmental justice, whether we're talking about housing, right? Our communities, our governments cross all sections. And so we want to ensure that tribal leaders have a voice. And so through our consultation policy in the first 6 days of the administration, I think we were successful and able to make sure that tribal leaders do have a place to provide meaningful input and that they're listened to. And so here at the Economic Summit, we really want to make sure that tribal leaders understand that economic development and prosperity, self-determination of tribal communities is absolutely a part of the Biden-Harris administration's agenda, and we want to try to guide tribal leaders in helping them understand all the resources and technical assistance that's available to them, and certainly there's a lot. So we have a great team out here through our White House Council on Native American Affairs that are spending all day providing that kind of support and education to our leaders, and we're just excited to be here and engage with folks.
There's been a number of policy issues that have come out of the Biden administration, specifically since you and I last spoke. I mean, we saw the White House Tribal Nations Summit, and so I'm really curious at this point, it's May in 2022, what are tribal leaders' concerns now, and what are people coming to you with saying, we need help on this?
Well, I think there was a lot of resources that were allocated in the first year of the administration with the bipartisan infrastructure law and the American Rescue Plan. That's over $44 billion, an unprecedented amount of resources going out to tribal communities. A lot of it is implementation. So we're, up to this point, I think we've allocated over $88 million to tribal communities, over $100 billion across the boards to tribes, states, local governments through the infrastructure law. We want to make sure that tribes are able to understand all the ways that they can access those resources. We put out a infrastructure guidebook several months ago to help not only tribal governments, but state and local governments access the information and know where to go to really be able to leverage those resources. But we're hoping in very short order here to release a specific tribal guidebook that will help unlock these resources for tribal governments. Especially we know the great variety in Indian country with our 574 tribal nations spanning from Alaska to Florida. And so we want to make sure that we're providing an equitable resource for folks to really go out and not only receive those resources, but look at the hundreds of billions of dollars that tribes are eligible for. So that's part of it, is ensuring that our tribal leaders know what's out there already for them. And then it's the other things like ensuring that they hear about the president's budget. You know, we had an unprecedented amount of money for Indian country in general for tribal programs, right? And really transformative events that happen through consultation, like providing that the Indian Health Service is now being called to shift to mandatory funding from before. So we're really excited to be able to share some of that news. I know there's a lot of content that's always coming from the administration, but we do have a full team here. I think we've heard from Administrator Guzman earlier in the conference. We've heard from Secretary Buttigieg, and we'll hear from our Director of Intergovernmental Affairs on Thursday about all the progress that we've made in the administration.
Well, we have you here. I actually want to touch base on that. You work in the Office of Intergovernmental Affairs. Sort of explain to our viewers what exactly that means and sort of how tribes are in standing with other kinds of governments.
Absolutely. So in the White House, there's many different offices. We have our policy offices, our engagement offices. Intergovernmental Affairs, really, we handle everything from tribal governments, state governments, local governments, municipal governments, everything that's not Congress. So really it's positioned there to provide parity and ensuring that tribal nations are placed in an office that respects the nation-to-nation relationship. So we're sort of the connective tissue to all our different offices within the White House, to the president, and all our different principal offices, the vice president, the first lady, second gentleman, and we really do our best to ensure that tribal leaders are able to connect with everyone, that we can help answer questions, that we can help work with our colleagues across the federal family to really ensure that tribal governments are being listened to and that they can provide meaningful input. So we're sort of the entry point, but also in a very specific way, ensuring that tribes are viewed as governments, both intentionally and then the way that we work with them on a day-to-day basis.
Well, Pawi Rivera, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Isabella Guzman is the administrator for the Small Business Administration, and she's here at RES. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here.
I understand this is not your first time to RES.
No, as a cabinet member, this is my second official visit to RES. And in addition, when I was leading on California small businesses for Governor Newsom, I also attended.
It's so important. I mean, the conversation about small business in Indian country is often narrow because people think about tribal enterprises and some of the really large enterprises. But small business is also really critical to building an economy.
That's right. I mean, they are the backbone, and they do create 2/3 of net new jobs, especially in the early stages of their development. And so if we want to have an equitable economic recovery, we need to focus on our small business startups as well.
One of the really cool things about the entrepreneurial age right now is that so many women are creating businesses.
That's right. In fact, for the past decade, women have been leading on the startup rates. Women and people of color have been starting businesses at the highest rates. And so I tell my team, this is the changing face of entrepreneurship. And that also means that as the federal government and as the SBA that's focused on delivering the American dream of business ownership to more, we need to make sure our programs fit the needs of those great entrepreneurs.
One of the challenges for so many entrepreneurs, particularly from Indian country, is access to capital. And your agency has more to do with that than anything, in helping at least the conversations occur. What are some of the opportunities there?
Well, now more than ever, SBA is really rethinking how it does capital. We do want to fund businesses from startup to growth to resilience. And during the pandemic, we've put out over $1.2 trillion in relief to save millions of businesses. And now we're looking at our programs from that same lens. Let's take the learnings and apply it so that we can have better reach and actually serve those entrepreneurial communities, like those native-owned small businesses, from the artisans to the construction companies to the tech providers.
So much of what we do is about storytelling. And I think maybe this is just too esoteric, but from about 1930 on, a lot of the story has been about government. But then you go to places like the flea market in Gallup, New Mexico, and you see more entrepreneurial spirit than almost anywhere.
Yes, no, that's true. I mean, I think, in reading too about how small businesses were able to adapt during the pandemic, a lot of them went online. They went into e-commerce. And so they're not only defining our neighborhoods, but our digital neighborhoods too, and using social media to reach more people. So now they're able to tell their stories more broadly. And at the SBA, we have a Small Business Digital Alliance. We're trying to continue to encourage that because we want more people to see our great small businesses from all over the country.
So much of the structure is changing too. We're seeing more people say, a business doesn't have to be a for-profit operation. There's a way to create lots of jobs and opportunities as Indian country does.
Well, when you talk to a small business owner or an entrepreneur, I grew up in a small business family. I saw it in how important my dad was to the community. He always gave back. He's a veterinarian and always did free clinics and helped people out with their services. And so you see that with every entrepreneur. They're always finding ways to give back to strengthen their community because it's their clients. And I think that's what's really powerful is that, and so many of them are social change agents or, starting creatively impact kind of companies, especially the future generations. And they care about our planet and our environment and what happens to it.
I think of folks that are struggling with, say, ESG and other changes. Tribal communities have been doing a lot of that for a long time.
That's right. That's where they lead. And I think, we need to, the president talks about this all the time that, we have to build back better and have an equitable economic recovery because he believes that there are great ideas from everywhere and anywhere. And celebrating those ideas will help us be more globally competitive. And so that's why we really are focused on making sure, people have the opportunities. I will say that, access to capital is one of those important opportunities because people with great ideas have to get to yes in the capital markets. And the SBA has been expanding its network, including with Owista Corporation, that is a CDFI, Community Development Financial Institution, intermediary, and helping CDFIs, native CDFIs across the country get more capital to these great entrepreneurs.
You've also elevated the Office of Native American Affairs within SBA. Maybe tell us about that.
Yes. Well, and I'm very gifted that I have an incredible leader in Jackson Brasi, who is come to be the assistant administrator over the Office of Native American Affairs. I think it's really important from an equity perspective that we have unique voices at the table. I mean, it was President Biden has the most diverse cabinet in history because he knows diverse teams have better results. And so I wanted to make sure that ONA, the Office of Native American Affairs, reported directly to me and that I could benefit from the great insights that Jackson and his team bring to the table.
I want to close by, we have about a minute, but what's your takeaway from a conference like RES?
Well, I always come back uplifted and full of hope for the future because you see this entrepreneurial spirit alive and well. And when I meet, whether it's the artisans walking through the halls or those, contractors who are trying to do business with the federal government, I think that when we talk about, rebuilding, making more in America, it's through our small businesses. And I think that, they're up to the challenge, and that gives me great hope.
Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We're back to meet another extraordinary 40 Under 40 award recipient. Carly Griffith Hotbit is the Associate Director of the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative. She will be honored on Wednesday night with the award given by the National Center. Congratulations to you, Carly, and thank you for being here.
Thanks, Aaliyah. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
So your Food and Agriculture Initiative, tell us more about it and what kinds of work you do.
Sure. So we had a pretty fortuitous founding by a couple of very dynamic Indigenous women. Stacy Leeds was the dean at the University of Arkansas School of Law, first Native American woman to be the dean of a law school, and Janie Sims Hipp, who was on faculty. And Janie and Stacy really got us off the ground with the intent to better serve tribes and tribal producers in supporting food initiative efforts. We cannot be truly sovereign unless we can feed our own people. Food sovereignty is a component of tribal sovereignty. And so our goal is to help reduce the barriers to access to resources and federal funding and programs, and also encourage our stakeholders to have their voices elevated for policy changes to better incorporate opportunities for Indian country.
And the initiative itself actually offers a number of services to tribes and to Native people. Tell us about some of those services.
Sure. So we offer direct consultation with tribal producers and tribal governments and also tribal organizations to help address and make recommendations about how to navigate Indigenous agriculture. We know that we have a lot of nuances associated with being Indigenous producers in the United States, including how we hold land, different access to markets, and different challenges that aren't necessarily experienced by non-Native producers and governments. And so we know that sometimes it takes a little bit of extra help or a little bit of a broader perspective to really capitalize on the opportunities that exist. So the resources that we have available are anything from infographics to how-tos, guided worksheets. We have what's called the EATS Academy, Empowering Agriculture Through Sovereignty, and have developed a series of resources available to help people get started and know what direction to head in, whether they're wanting to start or scale up their agribusiness operation.
You've talked a little bit about this already, but this idea of food security and food sovereignty, what exactly does that mean to you in Indian country?
So to me, food security means having the foods that you want to eat available to you in a manner that you are able to acquire them. Food sovereignty means that you are getting to make those decisions about those food choices and are really cognizant of what it means to be able to feed yourself, feed your family, and feed your community in a way that is healthy and resilient and lines up with your cultural values. So when we're talking about food security, that's more availability. When we're talking about food sovereignty, that's self-determination and direction through our food sources.
Yeah, and all of it sounds interconnected, but also really different at the same time. I'm really curious, a lot of the other work that your initiative does is work to address policy and to advocate for tribal leaders. What's something that you hear from tribal leaders that they're saying, we really need some help in this, and help us reach out to lawmakers or address legislation? What
Sure.
are those topics?
So right now, we're in the lead up to a Farm Bill. A Farm Bill is reauthorized every 5 years. So Farm Bill 2023 is coming up. We're actually the policy and research partners for the Native Farm Bill Coalition. So we have the opportunity to go out to the community and hear feedback from tribal leaders. There are a number of topics and issues that come up. There's geographical differences and cultural differences, but we're hearing a lot about the need for support for natural resource management to be equitable and fair and have access, also incorporating opportunities for tribal ecological knowledge in federal programs that maybe wouldn't otherwise consider them. So looking for ways to make policy better fit and match with our cultural traditions, while also being cognizant of the need for economic development, revenue generation, job creation, resiliency and sustainability.
Maybe talk about climate change and how much that's affecting the work that you're doing, and what tribal leaders are saying that they need help with as well.
Sure. So when we're talking about climate change, that affects people in a variety of ways, but a lot of the things that we're seeing are a lot more weather volatility, and drought is a big example of that. And we're seeing a lot more issues with drought come up. So when we are looking at opportunities to be resilient, that means taking care of the resources that we do have and how we use them. Irrigation infrastructure upgrades is a big one. We're looking at ways to have a smaller carbon footprint and eat food more locally so it doesn't have to cross the country 3 or 4 times before it hits your plate. And reducing the inputs that are needed to get food from ground to plate is something that we're hearing a lot from a climate change perspective, because we know if we're able to use less or need less, we use less, and there's more available, and we don't have such a competition for resources.
We only have about a minute left, but we were talking off screen here before this interview started, and you said, this is my passion. I could talk about it all day. So if you were talking to a young person who said, that's a really cool business and I'd love to get started, where would you lead them to?
Sure. So one of the great things that we offer for young people, we have a youth summit every summer in Fayetteville at the school. Encourage youth from 18 to 24 to come participate in our youth summit to learn more about opportunities in tribal agriculture. It's not just production agriculture. It's not just cows and plows. There are a ton of job opportunities available, and I feel very lucky because I didn't know that my job existed. When I went to law school, I never thought that I would get back into agriculture, but I feel very lucky to have the opportunity to work in tribal governance, agriculture, policy, and law. And it's a very exciting field, and I would encourage anybody to check it out. There are a lot more opportunities in agriculture than just what people think of initially.
Right. Well, Carly, congratulations to you again, and thank you for being here.
Thanks so much.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For more news, visit IndianCountryToday.com. From Team ICT in Las Vegas, stay safe, my relatives. I am Aaliyah Chavez.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.